Good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Schultz, and I'm the editor of the website tcsdaily.com. I want to thank you for being with us tonight. The title of tonight's program comes in the form of a question: An Army of Davids or the Triumph of Goliath? And with that question in mind, we'll be exploring the intersection of media, technology, markets, and politics with three distinguished panelists who are also distinguished authors. First up tonight is Glenn Reynolds. Glenn is a law professor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, or at least that's his day job. He is best known as the founder and the tireless publisher of the influential blog site Instapundit.com. Glenn is also a contributing editor at TCS Daily, where he's written a weekly column for the last 4 years. Glenn has written on everything from nanotechnology to space exploration to the internet. And in particular, Glenn has examined the effect that new technology is having on media, business, and politics. Glenn is the author of an important new book, and one from which we get tonight's topic for debate. The book is An Army of Davids: How Markets and Technology Empower Ordinary People to Beat Big Media, Big Government, and Other Goliaths. I've been honored to work with Glenn for the last few years. Many of the themes and ideas that are tackled in his new book he explored in his columns on TCS. Of all the writers I've worked with over the years, I can't think of another who's thought as intelligently or as productively about the issues we're going to discuss tonight as Glenn has. But best of all, from an editor's standpoint, he's been an absolute delight to work with. So Glenn, it's good to have you here tonight. We're also glad to have with us Joe Trippi. Joe began his political career working on Ted Kennedy's presidential campaign in 1980. His work in presidential politics continued with the campaigns of Walter Mondale, Gary Hart, and Richard Gephardt. Most recently, Joe was national campaign manager for Howard Dean's presidential campaign in 2004, where he harnessed online technology to organize what became one of the largest grassroots movements in presidential politics. His innovative use of the internet for small donor fundraising led to the Dean campaign raising more money than any Democratic presidential campaign in history, and it prompted the editors of the New Republic to describe him as the man who reinvented campaigning. Joe documents much of his tale from the 2004 campaign in his fascinating book, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised: Democracy, the Internet, and the Overthrow of Everything. Joe, it's good to have you here tonight. And our third panelist is Barry C. Lynn. Barry is a senior fellow at the New America Foundation in Washington. At New America, it studies the new ways that global businesses organize manufacturing operations and how this affects international security, the interests of investors, and the development of middle-income nations. Barry is a former executive editor of Global Business, a monthly magazine for executives at large multinational companies. And earlier, he worked as a reporter for the Associated Press and for Agence France-Presse in South America and the Caribbean. And Barry has recently published a powerful and provocative book, End of the Line: The Rise and Coming Fall of the Global Corporation. Barry, welcome. Moderating tonight's panel is Nick Gillespie, the editor-in-chief of Reason magazine. Reason is a libertarian monthly and was named one of the 50 best magazines for 2 straight years by the Chicago Tribune. Nick is, in my view, one of the pioneering journalists of our time. To give just one simple but I think revealing illustration, he is almost certainly the only journalist who interviewed both Ozzy Osbourne and the 2002 Nobel laureate in economics, Gordon Smith. I'd like to thank the Donald and Paula Smith Family Foundation and Reason magazine, who along with TCS are co-sponsoring this event. I expect it to be a stimulating evening, and with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Nick, who will guide us through the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I too want to thank TCS Daily, the Donald and Paula Smith Family Foundation for helping make this evening possible. What I want to do is, or what we're going to be doing tonight, I'm going to give some brief contextual framework kind of comments, and then each of our speakers is going to talk between 5 to 7 minutes, no more than 7 minutes. Then we'll open it up to questions, and we'll have a conversation, a good conversation, I hope. The bar, let me point out, this is kind of a celebration of open source. It's also an open bar, so help yourselves to, please take what you want, but drink what you take. And during the talk, please don't spill your drinks on other people. So what we're talking about here is, David versus Goliath. And the decline of American liberalism is great and underappreciated. 1955, libertarian reading of U.S. history. The great and late scholar Arthur E. Kirch observed, and I quote from him, "Since the time of the American Revolution, the major trend has been in the direction of an ever greater centralization and concentration of control, politically, economically, and socially. The liberal values," and by which he means the classical liberal values, "associated with the 18th century Enlightenment, and especially that of individual freedom, have slowly lost their primary importance in American life and thought." He was writing in the 50s in the heart of the kind of McCarthy period as well as the era of the organization man. E. Kirch was pessimistic about the future of individual freedom in the United States. And he was not always on target. In 1967, for instance, The Summer of Love, he wrote an introduction to a new edition of his book in which he discoursed thus, and I quote again, "Traditional liberties in the sense of restrictions on the all-pervasive powers of centralized governments are losing favor as compared with the freedoms or privileges that organized group pressure can persuade the welfare state to bestow upon citizenry. I do not think many of the traditional freedoms will remain in any effective sense." Close quote. Tonight's panel will explore in part whether E. Kirch's loss is correct, or at any rate relevant in contemporary America. There are undoubtedly areas of life where centralization and concentrated control have grown prodigiously since E. Kirch published his book. In 1950, for instance, there were 100,000 school districts in the United States. Nowadays, there are only about 15,000. The federal government is vastly larger than it was a half century ago, and state and local governments are similarly overgrown. National chains such as Walmart and Barnes & Noble and McDonald's dominate the retail sectors in ways that no business really did 2 generations ago, or very few. And yet there also seems to be little serious doubt that most, though certainly not all of us, are living lives that are far more individualistic than was possible at the end of World War II. De jure segregation is a thing of the past, and tolerance of alternative lifestyles has proceeded so fast that there is effectively no mainstream anymore. Work arrangements are more fluid and personalized than they ever have been in the United States, and we're generally living longer and richer, if not necessarily happier lives than our parents and grandparents. So tonight we ask, do the internet and other related technologies allow us to be more in control of our lives? Are politics, culture, and economics more responsive to individuals than ever before, or is more power becoming concentrated in fewer and fewer hands? Or are both things happening simultaneously? The book titles of 2 of our panelists leave little doubt where they stand on the basic question. Glenn Reynolds' just published book, An Army of Davids, is subtitled, How Markets and Technologies Empower Ordinary People to Beat Big Media, Big Government, and Other Goliaths. The subtitle of Joe Trippi's 2004 volume, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, is similarly upbeat and liberatory. And the subtitle is Democracy, the Internet, and the Overthrow of Everything. The book title of our third panelist is less sanguine, though no less apocalyptic. Barry Lynn's End of the Line is subtitled The Rise and Coming Fall of the Global Corporation, where Glenn and Joe emphasize the empowering of individuals and other outliers, marginal groups, marginal people, subcultures. Barry concludes almost the exact opposite is taking place in today's increasingly networked and globalized world, writing on the last page of his book, and I quote, "Great economic powers have been assembled, ever more able to extract the wealth they seek from lesser firms and from small and desperate states and from individual citizens. Their way increasingly relies on the use of consolidated brute economic force to extract wealth from the individual and from the social infrastructure." Close quotes. That very roughly lays out the territory we'll map tonight, and we'll go on to first Glenn Reynolds, then Joe Trippi, and then Barry, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So Glenn, take it away.
Yeah, I guess I want to open with the caveat that all of this goes well beyond our topic tonight, which is the internet. And in fact, the general thesis of An Army of Davids goes beyond the internet. It's basically how we are moving toward worker control and the means of production without all that tedious communism stuff. And the internet and blogs and everything like that are one subcase of this more general phenomenon. So I just want to make that point. It's certainly been my experience with the internet that it has opened up a lot of stuff, and indeed, the biggest complaint seems to be that the little people are getting too much power. This led Nick Denton to worry about what he called organizational terrorism, where dissatisfied employees can set up blogs and terrorize their bosses. It's happened, and in fact, if you read the sort of Human Resources magazine, there's been an interesting shift. From a few years ago, they had to do with the perils that blogging posed to the careers of the bloggers within an organization. And the newer wave of articles is the perils that the bloggers within an organization pose to the careers of their bosses. I see the people nodding. I've seen that phenomenon too. And we've seen that in places like Los Alamos National Laboratory, a place you wouldn't expect to be on the cutting edge of freedom and anarchy. But we've seen it in a lot of places. There are a lot of people who have things to say, and they have traditionally not been able to say them very much. And now they are. Now, that doesn't guarantee that people will listen, but people often do, and they listen a lot more often than they did when people weren't really able to speak at all. It is a trend that I think is going to continue, and I think that some of the mainstream media predictions of blogging's demise serve only to underscore how out of touch these predictors are. Because they tend to be couched in terms of blogging's non-viability as an economic enterprise. Blogging, and I think this goes for actually all sorts of amateur activity, isn't going to make very many people rich. Some people will get rich. Some people will make some money. More people will make a little money. Most people won't make much money at all. I tend to look at that and say, as they say at Microsoft, that's not a bug, that's a feature. It's not a bug because it means people are doing it without any hope of making money. And it doesn't matter if it makes money. People are doing it because they like it. They're doing it because it's fun. My favorite thing that I do in this area right now is doing podcasts with my wife. They don't make a dime. I mean, figure out how you make money off a podcast. But they're fun. And people do the stuff because it's fun. I'm pretty sure that a lot of us are sort of genetically hardwired to share our opinions and our thoughts and stuff like that. I think it probably goes back to the caveman days. If you imagine two tribes of cavemen walking up toward a cave, there's one where everybody's sort of sullen and quiet and doesn't talk, and there's another where somebody says, I think there's a bear in that cave. I'm pretty sure I know which ones went on to have descendants. So I think that we are hardwired to share our opinions. We don't need to make money at it. I think people who lead Dilbert-esque lives of dissatisfaction in the media organizations may find it hard to imagine doing what they do without being paid. But for a lot of people, share your opinions and your views and your observations and accounts of what you've experienced is a reward all itself. And the other thing that means is that the other offsetting prediction of the death of this amateur internet stuff, which is everybody will sell out and go commercial, well, that's not going to be true either because most people won't be able to make any money at it. So the bulk of it will stay amateur even if some people make money. And I think that means there'll always be a kind of authentic tinge to the blogosphere and to the wide range of amateur activities you see that people can do now that the tools have become so cheap that most people can afford them. That is very different from what we've seen in the big organizations, the top-down media, the large corporations that manufacture things and so on across the economy. And I think that's going to carry a lot of social consequences with it as well. And I'm not supposed to overrun my time, so I guess
You've got 2 minutes.
I have 2 whole minutes. Oh, well then. Is that?
You could do, 5, 6 podcasts.
That's true. It really, I see this over and over again because I watch people, people read my blog and they email me and say, I've decided to blog, which they do because seeing that I do it, they figure how hard it can be. It's like the old punk rock ethos, They were terrible. I wanted to be terrible too. That's exactly what happens. They do it, and it's fun, and they like it. And they'll email me later. I can't believe I didn't do this before. It is something that really undermines the sort of 90s claims that you're going to see an atomized bunch of people who will be playing video games and sitting in front of a computer and not communicating with each other and not bonding, as people, in fact, form a lot of bonds through the internet, and I think form a lot more community. It's not bowling alone at all. And I really think that You see that not only through things like blogs, but actually through what I regard as the dark matter of the electronic universe, which is the world of games and gaming. Something I have a chapter on in the book, but that somebody else to write a book on, because I really think that the cultural impact of games and gaming is probably a lot greater than the cultural impact of political blogging that I do. It's just that journalists who write about things read political blogs and don't play Doom or whatever.
And on that, where they don't admit it.
So that may be it.
But that's a good note to end on. Now, Joe, can you give us a spiel?
Sure. I think I can do that. Well, I obviously agree quite a bit with Glenn on where we are and where things are headed, but I want to sort of expand on where I think things are at. I think we are experiencing communications shift in power, not unlike the invention of the printing press. Before the printing press, the wealthy and the elites were able to hire scribes that would copy the Bible or give them their own handwritten copy of whatever the document was. That kept information and the distribution of it in a top-down, fairly controlled means of the elites and the wealthy controlling it. And all of a sudden, the printing press happens, and relatively cheaply, something like the Bible can be printed, tons of copies of it, and distributed in a way that suddenly a whole lot of other folks have the information that only a few people before were able to afford. When you look at it in those terms, that is it's sort of have a multi-way, a two-way, a way of communication that's just happened. Again, in other words, prior to the blogosphere and the internet, and basically no barrier to entry for someone to put their own news out or their own opinions out. Now, suddenly you have that same thing that happened when the printing press was devised. And that is creating a huge shift in power. And when people talk about the information age, I think they're wrong. Because what the internet and what this technology is doing is, if it's distributing information, and in a top-down world that we live in, information and knowledge people get from that is power. Again, going back to the people who own the scribes, who paid the scribes to write their stuff on the copies for, they were the people with the information, they had power. Well, when you look at it that way, then what's happening here is the internet isn't just distributing information anymore. If information is power, the knowledge you get from information is power, then it's distributing power to the bottom. And that, in a top-down world of corporations, big government, big parties, by the way, both parties have gotten so far away in a lot of ways from what they really were in terms of the grassroots and people that they're big too. All of them are now threatened by an army of David. I mean, I really believe, I got to say, I envy Glenn the title of the book. It definitely explains what's going on. And I think the real question for the big guys, whether you're a party or whatever, is to understand, look, you're Goliath. The army of David is out there now. And it's not just one guy with a slingshot, it's an army of guys with a slingshot. Do you want to be Goliath, or do you want to be their slingshot? Is something I would think. And by the way, and the best example of this is Napster and the music industry. The music industry is the Goliath that goes, no, we're going to keep selling you, trying to sell you the entire album, even though there's only one song you want and the rest of it all sucks. But we're gonna maintain our control. Apple and iPods and iTunes decide we're going to be the slingshot. There are millions of people out there who are saying, no, we've got power, we can come together, we can share that power, we can use it, and we can beat back a recording industry that's failed us and challenge that industry, which they did. And a bunch of companies are losing tons of profits. There's one company that has went along and said, no, here, we can make a really cool slingshot for you guys. And that's what's happened there. And so when you start looking at journalism, let me tell you, the problem with journalism right now is the fact that every single American is an expert at something. Your plumber is an expert at something. So when Dan Rather and the National Guard documents for George Bush come along, guess what? There are experts out there now who work with IBM Selectrics and funds and things for quite a while. They can challenge the top with facts and their expertise. And if they're right, it can grow and becomes and take down or help or cause a lot of problems for one of the Cutskill men has been one of the most respected names in journalism and for top producers. So my own view is we are now in this critical period where the bottom is gaining in power. And that is going to be a very, very disruptive thing to corporations, to government, to existing big political parties that don't pay attention to this change. And the other thing I think that means is it's really interesting to see like what IBM's done. IBM, Goliath, right? What is it doing? IBM has encouraged every single one of its 347,000 employees to start a blog. This is a Goliath that's looking at this, and so you've got major people out there. It's not just Joe. Not somebody grew the Dean campaign and tried to figure out how to use this power and this technology to change politics. There are big players out there looking at how to engage in this conversation and be part of it because it's a very powerful thing. And in that sense, it's one of the most community-building things I've ever seen. Did I have
Just that.
I'll wait for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. And I wonder, does IBM insist on a dress code on flying?
No, but they do have a policy that's up on their site that they looked at to encourage their employees. I'll get into why they're doing it when I think
Yes. Fascinating. Barry, please.
Well, thanks, Nick. I guess I want to start off by saying that I very much hope and pray that Glenn and Joe are right. And I think actually if you read my book carefully, you'll see that there's a lot of what I've written is intended to sort of reach out to people who are not normally asked to really take part in decisions within the political economy. And I think the reason I do that is because what I see within the political economy, and I'm not going to use the word marketplace because it's a political environment, is the exact opposite of what we were just seeing in the political environment per se. That is an incredible degree of consolidation of power. So in my 5-7 minutes, I want to do three things very quickly. One is just put out there the idea that Goliath exists, and in the form of new global oligopolies. Look a little bit at how this new Goliath exercises power within the political economy, and also then look very briefly at what it means for the freedom of the individual citizen. So anyway, the new oligopolies. Now, just even the use of my use of that term may surprise some of you. There has been a lot of writing about oligopoly for a long time. But, and actually it also surprised people because there was a period of sort of intense competition quite recently when we opened up our economy back in the early 1990s, mid-1990s. But what we've seen since that period, over the last decade, is a series of mergers and acquisitions that has radically consolidated most global systems. And right now, I guess you could say that, there's still places where there's lots of competition. You can just go and ask GM and they'll tell you that there certainly is. But when you see in places like, in terms of medical devices, in semiconductors, in foods, in grains, in metals, in aerospace, what you've seen is we are down to 4 or 3, in some cases 2 dominant players. In some cases we've got outright monopolies. Now, and when you do have oligopoly, a lot of these firms are engaging in outright trading off of marketplaces. And one of the things that you see is a number of marketplaces that has now been, in which one firm has 70+% of the product markets in the United States. And you see it could be just razor blades. It could be something as simple as canned soups. You also see it in a lot of different types of programmable chips, in syringes, in vaccines, in chemicals, and certain airline routes. So what you see is an unprecedented amount of specialization within the economy. We've never seen this kind of specialization within the productive economy. Now, so how do these kind of firms that capture this power, how do they exercise that power? Now, traditionally, we think of monopolies as sort of exercising their power by ripping off the consumer through high prices. What we see now is a sort of a mirror image of monopoly. Back in 1982 is the last time we really changed our antitrust laws, and that was early in the Reagan administration. And they basically stripped down antitrust so that the only group that is protected within the economy is the consumer. But if you don't rip off the consumer, you're pretty much free to rip off everyone else. And so basically what we have now are firms that have basically used their power. There's a mirror image of monopoly, which is called monopsony. And monopsony is when you have essentially a single buyer. And then what the single buyer can do is they basically dictate price downwards. And the word dictate is very important, because what happens is that firm sets the price. The suppliers, they have 2 or 3 suppliers that are feeding into their system. They compete to meet that price. And so you have a situation in which the top firm has an incredible amount of power. So one of the most dramatic versions of this is Walmart. Walmart's captured so much power it can pretty much dictate price to firms as powerful as Procter & Gamble. It dictates to Coke what it's going to put inside of its Coke's products. It can dictate to Levi's how they're going to ship and package its products. But we see this throughout the entire production system. I mean, it's not just Walmart. It's like, we see a number of firms, producers, that used to be producers, that have transferred themselves into firms. That's what outsourcing means. Firms that outsource means of production so they can exercise monopsony power over the actual producers. One of the things what this really means, just jumping ahead, is that what monopsony is, as opposed to monopoly. Traditional monopoly was basically an imposition of a tax on society. Imposition of monopsony is a crushing of the free market, because when you dictate price down, you basically make so there's no true competition within that. So anyway, what does it mean for the freedom of the individual citizen? I think that citizen as entrepreneur, what you have now is fewer and fewer buyers at all levels. This is at every level of the economy. You're seeing massive consolidation. Citizen as worker, you're seeing fewer and fewer bosses. Ultimately, at the upper level, whenever you have a single firm dictating prices down through entire sectors of the economy, it means that all workers within that sector, essentially their wages are going to start to be harmonized, and they're going to start to be harmonized downwards, and the power in terms of how they're going to be harmonized is going to rely with the powerful firm. Citizen as innovator, I think this is an issue that plays with this panel. Where we're seeing in sector after sectors, we're seeing fewer and fewer pathways to bring new technologies all the way through the hierarchy of power to the consumer. And then I guess this sort of society as a whole, what we're seeing is we're seeing fewer and fewer pathways along which society as the systems in society can evolve. And that's we can get into that a bit later. But in terms, just to conclude, I assume my time is running out, but Davids of the world, to me, just the very way that this is sort of being presented is kind of redolent of 1990s, very Robert Reich. It's very Daniel Pink, Free Agent Nation. And the fact is that was 10 years ago. And the reality is very different now. The reality is of systems in which very powerful firms dictate price, dictate everything down through entire systems. So I have to say, just to sum up, I think for libertarians, this a day of reckoning is approaching, and I think that those who actually believe that freedom, who believe in freedom from monopoly, you guys are going to be sorting yourselves out from those who believe in freedom to make and enforce monopoly. And that's basically one of the things that's going to be happening is between people should read very carefully Hayek, and should read, again, very carefully Friedman, and you're going to have to choose between these two. Because Hayek is the person that, if you choose Hayek, you can choose competition. If you choose competition imposed by antitrust. If you choose Friedman, you choose denial. So
Let's stop there, although that's a great, I don't know who would win a fight between all of us in this room can feel good about it. I think all of us could take both of them. Thank you, Aaron. Let me take the moderator's prerogative. I'm going to ask a quick question of each panelist, and I promise to make an actual question. Please give an actual answer. And then we'll move to the audience. Glenn, near the start of your book, you write that, and you mentioned this in your comments as well, that, quote, the worker's paradise may turn out to be a capitalist creation after all. I've been telecommuting. I've been working out of my house for many years now. I realized that was one of the original sins of the Industrial Revolution, was to alienate the workplace from the home place. I got to tell you, it's really kind of a blessing. Can you just elucidate for the audience a little bit more what would be great about the worker's paradise and the reintegration of work into the home?
Well, the context of that is, that it goes back to the worker controlled means of production. We used to go to factories because you had to have people in close proximity to a whole lot of equipment to do a whole lot of things. And I think factories, we still of course have factories, but a movie studio is a kind of factory. You don't really need one of those to do a lot of stuff now. A recording studio, same thing. Publishing houses are now run on very decentralized methods, and so are a lot of other businesses. In fact, I got on the plane coming up here this morning, and the woman next to me is the VP of marketing for a $40 million company she started 3 years ago with a friend, and she works at home 3 weeks out of the month and comes up here for a month, a week out of every month. The technology means you don't have to, as you did in the 19th century, be somewhere where you can get television, where the phone can ring, where the messenger boys can come, and later where you had to be close to the Xerox machine. Remember those? And stuff like that.
Is there a downside to that?
Oh, of course there is. There's always a downside. As I say, the trouble with it is you can look at it as either, oh good, I get to work from home, or oh no, my work is taking over my house. And you certainly get that. I feel sure that the village blacksmith who's working in the forge out behind the house frequently wished he could run the kids off to go do his work somewhere where there'd be nobody to look over his shoulder. I think that, it cuts both ways. But my sense is that the great flannel suit era, the mass industrial era, wasn't one in which work was an especially happy experience. And we certainly heard all this about alienation and the separation of work life from home life and so on. And my own impression, and it's just an impression, I don't know if there's empirical research to support it, is that the people I know who are self-employed generally like their work better than the people who have old-fashioned jobs. And it's better and worse in various ways. You don't get laid off when you're self-employed, but on the other hand, you can have a bad year.
And you could have a real asshole as well.
Yeah.
Let me go to Joe for the next question. Joe, a few months ago in Reason, actually it was in December of 2004, so time is getting on. You, in an interview with Julian Sanchez of Reason, you mentioned that about 2008 presidential campaign. And you said, and I'm quoting here, I think there's a strong chance by 2008 we'll have a third party. You said the next guy who goes outside the party who's solid will set off a sea change in the parties, especially the party that loses this election in 2008. It's running on borrowed time. You could see one of the major parties become the Whigs. Could you explain a little bit what you mean by that, and also can you handicap which party you think is more likely to be?
Yeah, look, the two parties basically aren't really functioning very well right now. I don't think very many Americans, regardless of where they are ideologically, think very highly about either of the parties apparatus. They may like a specific candidate or specific office holder, but parties that they think are worthless. In that realm, the first thing is, well, why do we need parties? Well, look, there's two reasons, essentially. I mean, conventions and issues platforms do not matter at all. I mean, they're all pre-cooked somewhere else, and they let part of the convention apparatus go do what they want, and they go out and run their campaigns and say what they want, regardless of what the platform is. So that doesn't matter. There's only two things. One, the inheritance of a donor infrastructure, donor base to fund the campaign, and an organizational, the inheritance of an organizational structure in all 50 states and down to the county and precinct level in those states. That's it. The Dean campaign, pretty much, we raised more money than any Democrat had ever raised during a primary in history, breaking Bill Clinton's record. And Bill Clinton didn't set that record as a governor running for president. He said as a sitting president running for re-election. With all due respect to President Clinton, we didn't have Lincoln bedroom himself for $100,000 a night. Which just shows you the power of what happens when people in common cause actually come together and seek change. I think that's where I think that's what is going to happen here. I think that neither party seems like
let me play Barry for a second, or what he might be thinking. And it's like, well, Dean ran, he spent a lot of money, and he got smoked. And, the Democrats nominated the most establishment kind of traditional, hidebound, wooden candidate that they could find, that they could throw in that.
Sure.
Is there a reason to believe that it actually had an impact that went beyond a kind of, trial run that you can raise money on the internet?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, I think the urge has been there with the American people since Perot in 1992. You saw it again with McCain in 2000. The Republicans want to do something different. Let's not do the same old. Let's try to break the mold. The establishment, the Republican Party slaps him down with nanoseconds. Then you see that urge happen again with Dean trying to create change within the Democratic Party establishment. They do the same thing, surround the wagons and beat the living daylights and kill that as fast as they can. The problem is
further humiliation by making him DNC chair.
He chose that himself, which was the reason for it. But my point is that each time it's getting bigger and stronger. I think this impulse is getting bigger and stronger. I think, frankly, the net and a lot of the tools weren't mature enough back with McCain in 2000. We lucked out to a large, the maturation that happened between 2000 and 2003 was enough to create the possibility of Dean. Now, McCain is the hottest internet campaign in history as we roll through 2000. 40,000 people signed up for him and raised a few $1 million over the internet. But people were saying, boy, he's doing something different, and that's responding to him. 3 years later, we go to 650,000 people and $59 million. One thing I can assure you about 2008 is the same. I don't know what the hell is going to happen, but it's going to be exponentially the same time. I mean, somebody's going to raise $500 million, in my view, in 2008. I mean, some candidate will. You're talking about 5 million Americans giving $100 to a candidate. I mean, we've got 300 million of us, 180 something. I mean, we're not talking about big, huge numbers. I think if either party gets what's happening, you're going to see somebody step in the back and run as an independent.
Let me
able to harness those kinds of numbers, people, activity, contributions.
It's interesting to think about the Whigs and the fate of them. They were a fairly dominant party for a short period of time. They lost ground to Republicans, and the retool Democrats ended up kind of squaring off over slavery generally. What would be the issue that would drive that either the Republicans or the Democrats? What do they need to address a major issue in America that they're not addressing now? And if one of them makes a misstep, they go to the other things.
I think you've got. There's two numbers that should bug. I think deep down bug everybody. The first is George Bush's Pioneers and Rangers, folks that ponied up $100,000 or $1 million to fund his campaign. The Democratic Party has an interesting thing. They do not beat the Republicans among people who can only afford to contribute $100 or less. The Republican Party leads in that group. But $1,000 or less, Republicans still gain it. $10,000 or less, the Republican Party still beats it. $100,000 or less, the Republican Party still has more contributions at that level. $1 million or less, guess what? It's the Republican Party. Going to the 2003 election, the only category the Democrats beat the Republicans in was checks of $1 million or more. So on the one hand, you have Bush and his Pioneers and Rangers, and on the other hand, you have a party addicted to $1 million checks and above. In the meantime, healthcare, the deficit, a whole myriad. And I'm not getting into, I don't mean like the war. No. I'm talking about just a whole, something wrong when you have 33 lobbyists for every member of Congress, and that they seem to have more power than the American people do. So I think if either party was smart, and particularly look at the sort of the corruption that's swirling around today, if either party was smart, it would actually reform itself and do so unilaterally, and take it and become a party of the people. In lieu of that, I think the problem now is there are enough Americans out there who are willing to rebel against both parties and to rally around a candidate they think will change them. And I think, there are a number of people in office today and out that would fit that bill. From John McCain, I can go through them, but there's several people if they actually had the guts to do it, now that's the problem. The same system that's bred these two parties and being what they are is the same system that will probably work against one of them having the audacity to actually reach the two-party system and say, I'm going, but we'll see.
Barry, you mentioned Friedman and Hayek at the end, and at the very last line of your book is a line for line. Friedrich Hayek, the Nobel Prize winning economist, is a big hero. I suspect to Glenn, but certainly to Reason Magazine is one of our intellectual heroes. But he was a great apostle of political, economic, and social decentralization and deregulation. And Hayek, you quoted as saying, in social evolution, nothing is inevitable, but thinking makes it so. Can you talk real briefly about what, from a Hayekian perspective, what has to change and whether or not that's really possible? Because it would seem to be, if your argument is that the power structure is consolidating power, then how do you affect any kind of intervention in that actually shakes things up? And then when you oppose Hayek and Friedman in terms of monopsony or monopoly power, what is bad about, you said that the consumer keeps gaining from these things, so what is bad with the current situation? I think most of us in this room would say, we have vastly more, say from 1982 when you said monopoly laws were changed or antitrust laws were changed, we have a vastly greater array of books, of music, of technologies, of medical interventions. Life is much better than it was in 1982, along virtually every possible axis. And it's true throughout the developing world. However awful the developing world is now, the one thing you can say is that a smaller percentage of people live in absolute poverty, where they have more options, et cetera. So if you could address those briefly.
Actually, the first one is pretty easy. That question was sort of from a Hayekian perspective, what would you do? And Hayek made it very clear that he was a very strong believer in competition policy and antitrust. One of the things about, and actually I have a quote here which I could use, but actually I'll use it. The liberal argument is in favor of making the best possible uses of the forces of competition as a means of coordinating human efforts, not an argument for leaving things just as they are. It is based on the conviction that, where effective competition can be created, it is a better way to guide individual efforts than any other. It does not deny, but even emphasizes that in order that competition should work beneficially, a carefully thought out legal framework is required, and that neither the existing nor the past legal rules are free from grave defects. And basically what this is saying is that we have to be using the power of the state to break up private sector monopoly, as well as making sure that we are not allowing the state to monopolize the private sector activities. So, and then one of the things that you'll see if you read carefully through Friedman, even though he does pay some lip service to private sector, that there is generally a major, to private sector competition, there's a major lack of respect for the use of state power to enforce the breaking up of monopoly. And actually, when you saw with the Reagan Revolution, one of the things that you saw at that point was an outright defense of monopoly. You saw it with William Friend Smith, when he first came to power, said bigness is not necessarily badness. William Baxter, the antitrust enforcer, said big firms are more efficient. Now the thing is that yes, in certain ways, and for a certain period of time, bigness may be more efficient. And that sort of leads into the second question, which is about the gains of the consumer. Now there was a period after we broke up the power of the old producer oligopolies, when there was a lot of sort of intellectual property, a lot of sort of out in the field for people to take advantage of. We've seen a massive grab for that recently. And one of the things that, with a few exceptions, and you mentioned books and music, and that there's definitely more choice, but you're starting to see a number of sectors a major collapse of choice. And you're seeing it even in sectors like food products. And one of the things that there's a couple of studies recently that show that you're actually seeing these systems are starting to shrink into themselves. People are pulling products off of the marketplace. So what I say is that there was a period during which the consumer gained significantly. That's clearly not the case anymore. And then the other problem with that view is that to treat citizens only as consumers is to pervert what the citizen is. You ignore what the citizen as entrepreneur, you ignore the citizen as worker, you ignore the citizen as innovator, you ignore the citizen as a member of the community. You have turned him entirely into a being defined by materialistic characteristics.
Okay, let's open it up for questions. Do we have a microphone for the audience? I guess not. Okay, well, can we at least call up people and we'll shout? I see a young lad, the man of no account in the back. Could you please identify yourself?
I am Tim Cavanaugh from Reason Magazine. And my question is for Barry Lynn. There's an old cliche that the one place we see monopoly 100% of the time is in government. And it's equally true that there's no company in the solar system that's more in bed with the government than Archer Daniels Midland. And you've brought up food a couple times, that's what makes me think about it. So when you talk about using the power of the state to break up private sector monopoly, what do you mean? And I'm going to sneak a second question to the Instapundit and say, why don't you allow comments on your blog?
Barry, you want to go first?
Sure. Basically, one of the things you've seen, actually, and Archer Daniels Midland is a great example. You've had a sort of within the sort of world, I guess the number of firms in the world that are major traders in grain, we went from maybe 7 or 8, 15 years ago, we're now down to about 4. Archer Daniels is one of the few. Archer Daniels Midland, along with some of the other ones like Cargill, which is one of its main competitors in North America, what they've been doing to some extent is trading off their control over certain marketplaces. Increasingly, say, ADM has corn, Cargill gets soybeans, one of them has, ADM has ethanol out of corn, Cargill has ethanol out of sugar coming out of Brazil. So the issue is that in the past 25 years, we never had a perfect system. There never is perfect competition. It's all a matter of degrees of competition. And the absolute lack of any effort to impose competition on these systems from above for 25 years has made a bad situation much worse.
How, in terms of political economy, how do you assume ADM then is paying off politicians in one way or another, workers, et cetera? How do you intervene to actually get a shift in, ADM's connections or relations with the government?
Break it up. The only way that you can actually divide power is by dividing it. So I would say that you have to divide power.
Glenn, you want to ask?
Yeah, not having comments is somewhat kind of an expensive choice for me. And the reason is the comments actually boost your page views substantially. The comment is continually refreshed to see what somebody said in response. I don't do it for two reasons. One of them is that I am a law professor and I'm somewhat paranoid. And it's been my experience that the press often reports comments on people's blogs as if they were written by the blog author. This happens to Charles Johnson a lot. And I prefer not to do that. The other reason, and I have a discussion just in the book, which you should definitely buy and read to get a fuller account. At least five. Reading. And there is a sort of crashing the commons aspect to things like blog comments and also email lists and chat boards and other things in which you've got sort of a fixed amount of attention, which is a number of hours of attention that the whole audience is willing to pay, and it's absorbed at very little cost by commenters who post. And that means that in a way that audience becomes sort of a free good, and we know free goods tend to be overused. I kind of agree with Nick Denton that the advantage of the blogosphere is that it roots around idiots. If you don't like what somebody has to say, you don't have to read their blog. If you find their tone offensive, you don't have to read their blog. Email lists and Usenet seem to me to be a better model for how blog comments tend to work. And my experience has been that it's pretty hard, especially past a certain threshold of traffic, to maintain comments that are civil and interesting and kind of good. Daniel Dressman does it. His comments are always great. Roger Simon does it pretty well. Some other people do. But I find that past that, it gets quite difficult, and I don't choose to be an editor.
Well, thank you, Tim. And Tim is running a blog study campaign to end comments and hit and run.
Good idea.
We kind of like our idiots. Next question, please. Yes, you in the backward baseball camp.
I'm Dave Palmer with the American University College of Libertarians, and I have a follow-up for Mr. Lynn. It seems to me that in a lot of industries, particularly, for example, the food industry, there is actually a consumer backlash to the consolidation of power. For instance, with Whole Foods and the organics industry, a lot of consumers are deciding that they don't want to purchase from the monopolizing powers and instead want to turn to an alternative market. So they're using that power to, I suppose, the large corporations are lowering the cost of inferior goods by consolidation, and then a lot of consumers are deciding that they don't like those and they're turning to other alternatives. What do you think about that?
Well, that's an excellent point, and that's certainly that's like the natural way that people would respond in the marketplace. And Whole Foods is a good example of at least in this region, in the Northeast, a company that has sort of emerged relatively rapidly onto the playing field. But you sort of mentioned the issues like organic foods, and one of the things that you're seeing right now, this is sort of how this doesn't necessarily entirely work, that there's trying to be a marketplace response, is that Walmart, and part of its sort of campaign to divide the position, it hates unions. It's not going to make any kind of agreement with unions. That would actually be perhaps a more really intelligent way to screw up the economy if they did. But what they are doing is they are reaching out very actively to the organics food industry. And they are sort of these little tiny companies that have been sort of existing at the edge of the economy. And they've been growing, and they've been moving into places like Whole Foods. All of a sudden, Walmart's coming in and basically saying, come on in, and we're going to put you out to our systems, and revenues that these firms are going to essentially become, rather than sort of little firms on the edges of society growing organically, they're going to become essentially captives to Walmart. And so to the degree that once you end up getting certainly upwards of 50% of your revenue from a single firm, you're a captive to that firm. In fact, actually most studies show that once you get 20% or more of your revenue from a single firm, you tend to become a captive to that retailer. So my sense is that Walmart, like Microsoft, has grown to the point where it will simply incorporate innovation and will absorb it.
I have a prediction. I predict that Walmart is key. And I say this not because I know anything about Walmart, except that I was put into court Target, but because this is exactly the sort of thing that John Galbraith was saying about American corporations in general in the 60s, and that was the exact moment that they started swirling down the drain across a wide range of industries. So you have to read a book about the cutting collapse, don't you? So I think that the signs are there.
One of the things that we know, or one of the things about Walmart is that they've gotten so big it takes a very small percentage of drop off in revenue and store revenue to cream them. I mean, if they lost 1% of their revenue right now, they would be, they would be thrown, they'd be on the verge. And so I think I just want to talk about one thing that.
I hope you're going to say something good about Kmart.
No, well,
Kmart is
the power of,
making a really ugly.
I want to use sort of like the problem, like that have made sort of one degree of separation. It's going to be a bad example, but I think it proves the point. When Wendy's recently had a woman come out and say that she found a finger in her soup. And about 3 weeks later, she was arrested because it was a hoax and she was trying to do an insurance fraud thing on Wendy's. Wendy's was still losing a chunk of money. I think it was like $1 million a week or something at that point. Old media says woman found a finger in chili at Wendy's. Old media, or mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, comes back 3 weeks later and says she was arrested. 21 million Americans who watch the evening news on a regular basis. Well, when you go back to the Jib Jab, This Land Is Your Land cartoon that made, flash animation that made fun of George Bush and Kerry during the campaign, 65 million Americans viewed that within a 2-week period. So, where a major corporation is in trouble is when two kids with $500 and a Mac get together the day after Brian Williams says, woman found a finger in her soup, Wendy's. And they made really funny flash animation of cartoon characters biting into a Wendy's burger, and boom, a finger flies out every time they bite into it. And when they stick their spoon into a soup, into their chili, a finger flies out. And when the next scene is them dancing in Wendy's restaurants, on tables, on top of the tables at Wendy's with the Wendy's cartoon menu behind them, and as they're dancing to silly music, their fingers start to disappear. Now, we all are sending that on to everybody in our address book because we believe that is the funniest thing that we've seen in some time, and we're all laughing at this major corporation that has spent billions to build that brand image over the last few decades. And when the corporation decides somehow, some way, by the way, that they're going to get an email message out to me saying, hey, it's not true, she was arrested, I'm going to feel very compelled as a citizen, since everybody's doing so good a job of creating citizenship. I'm going to be very compelled as a citizen to make sure that I send that email on all those people I forwarded the funny flash messages to. Now, my point is that I think is a problem that we all have to look at, because I really believe we are 1 degree of separation away from that happening, that you're going to have this kind of thing happen to a corporation. But the other, it doesn't deserve it. I mean, in this case, this corporation wasn't doing anything. On the other hand, I do think that does signify growing power in the hands of a few people to create a movement or a gathering of enough Americans to wreak havoc on a company that it perceives to be doing ill will towards the country or towards citizens or consumers. And that shift in power, again, getting back to what I was talking about early on, is something that I think, in the hands of the Army of David, starts to mitigate against the Walmarts and the, I mean, maybe I'm being a little idealistically hopeful, but that's what I really believe that this power is all that's left between what you fear and any ability to stop it.
There's a really important difference between sort of the digital world and the real world. And I think that, you guys operate in the digital world, absolutely, when it comes to any information that can be, whether it's visual or text, or that, the breakdown of hierarchy in that system is phenomenal. And I don't want to even begin to say that that's not the case in that world. The ability of, but what in the real world, in the physical world, what you're seeing, in a case like, say, Walmart, even if it's, a situation like we described with Wendy's, where someone came out with the killer little video to make fun of Walmart. The fact is that in all of these towns, and all of these suburbs, increasingly all of these cities across the United States, there are gigantic stores there that are, and those are the only places in these communities where producers can meet with the consumer. And so that means is that for the next 50 years at least, barring some kind of catastrophe that is very unlikely, that's going to be where producers meet with consumers.
What happened to Sears Roebuck? There are husks, littering the country's landscape. They were dominant in a way, or Woolworths. I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, but I lived in very small towns where Walmart came in. They didn't destroy the downtown. They were the first, economic development in 10, 15, 20 years in places, and actually served a real function. I guess my question is, industry leaders actually, and I don't have any sympathy for them, but they've got a tough lot. McDonald's hasn't raised its prices in nominal dollars in years. They have to give away bigger portions, more French fries. They got to build play structures to keep my kids occupied, give them free toys, let me come back, read the newspaper, give me wireless. Walmart is constantly cutting prices to keep people coming in the store. America Online, the world's largest ISP, has to give away over 1,000 hours of free connection.
Actually, you mentioned Sears, and the thing is that there's different generations of firms, and one of the things about the previous generations, like Sears, for instance, is that they grew up under antitrust, where antitrust still existed, and there's actually an act, it's called the Robinson-Patman Act. So there's really three foundations.
Your argument is essentially Robinson-Patman. Act about not letting prices go below a certain level.
Yeah, and the thing about Robinson-Patman is that was famously against the AMT, the great Pacific Tea Company, which is the Walmart hero back in the 1930s and 40s. But it was also used repeatedly against Sears. So those generations of firms, the reason that they sort of hit a plateau and became sclerotic and created space for new sort of entries in the marketplace is exactly because we were using the power of the government to create space for competition. And that's what we're not doing now. We're not sort of thinning out the upper levels of the forest to allow the sun to get down to the lower levels to continue.
I think your model for the next 50 years is going to look more like eBay than Walmart. And I think that's one of the things I mentioned in the book is the number of people making their living off eBay is moving to within spitting distance of the number of people who work for Walmart now.
But
that's a very different model. And
one of the things Walmart does is it prevents its retailers from selling directly. The people that are under Walmart's power are not allowed to, increasingly not allowed to actually use the internet to reach their consumers. They have to work through Walmart. So that's just not a part of it.
Well, there's certainly no question. My brother works for a supplier that works with Walmart. There's no question that they're tough negotiators. Let's go to the next question. Back over here. Stand up, identify yourself, and shout loud. Yes, you, sir.
Mark Robertson, National Journalism Center. My question is for Mr. Lynn. do you support lowering barriers to entry into markets like first-class mail delivery, or do you support school choice that would lower barriers to entry in the education market, or do you support things like that, reduce barriers to entry in healthcare or insurance markets?
Well, absolutely. I mean, my kids go to school here in D.C., so actually in terms of school choice, one of the things that we're seeing is through charter schools, not so much vouchers, but charter school system is revolutionizing the school system here. And it's allowing anyone to basically set up a school. If you want to set up a school in this town, you can do it tomorrow.
Do your kids go to a charter? Do your kids go to a charter?
Mine don't, but I know a lot of friends who do. I have a lot of friends who do. I would send them to a charter. We're considering charters. So, I mean, the thing is that there are problems with it, but it's, over time it's going to lead to a revolution in a system that desperately needs a revolution.
Next question. Yes.
Francis Johnson, Strategic Planning Initiative. What do you think the bloggers' impact is in a place like China or Iraq or maybe even Iran, where bloggers are having their way on their subjects like what music you play or what you wear, but also on some of the political questions, speaking of power to their level right now. And
Thank you. Joe, you want to take that first question?
I think Iran in particular has a pretty incredible lead. I mean, it's a pretty vibrant and sizable blogging community that you wouldn't expect. And from our sort of view of, hey, we gave birth to this, and there's a lot of people in Iran and in China that blog quite a bit. So far, I mean, it's interesting to see how governments are going to try to have to deal with this, because I mean, certainly in China, the government's not real happy about it. The same thing in Iran. But both have a vibrant community. I'm more aware of Iran's community than I am of China's. I mean, I'm more out there to understand what's going on there. And they are, and the Iranian government has tried to crack down. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I personally don't think the government's going to be able to do a whole lot, but we'll see.
Anyone else? Next question. You, sir.
Thanks, Christian Roy. I'm with the Element firm. Mr. Lynn, you made a distinction earlier between the digital world and the real world. But it seems to me that when a blogger discovers spyware on Sony CDs, that causes them to pull those CDs from the market, that's the breakdown in hierarchy in the digital world having a very real effect on the real world. And my firm also does a trust report every year, which has recently, the findings have been that bloggers are becoming more trusted than academics, than journalists, than CEOs of corporations. When you have this horizontal power with thought leaders becoming bloggers, how can you not see that as an emerging power to these monopolies?
I mean, I think that in a number of cases, that kind of power obviously is having a huge effect, and that's fantastic. And when I say the physical world, I mean the world of factories, of distribution facilities, of trucking warehouses, semiconductor plants. And here's sort of a counter-example of what's taking place in the real world, which is that despite the fact the United States believes in free trade, not all nations do. And say Korea, for instance, is working very closely with Samsung to capture control of a couple of marketplaces, DRAMs, which is a type of memory chip. They already have 50+% of the capacity for production of DRAM, and they've just announced a $36 billion investment program, which will bring them about 75% of the total global capacity for DRAM. So Same thing with LCD screens. So, that means that there's a bunch of problems with that. And one is there's a lot of physical problems that if something happens in Korea, it's not the most stable part of the world. Much of our things that we count on, they're not going to get built. But just looking in terms of the freedom of the market to evolve, once you have 75% of the, you control 75% of the capacity of something, you set the price for that. You determine who's going to come into the market. You determine how that market's going to evolve. So that the freedom for new entrants into that market becomes less and less unless you have a major government effort to create a space for new entrants.
Can I interrupt, though? I think the technological curve is such that right now we're seeing the fact that the world is with digital information and not in what you call the real world. But it actually seems rather likely that over the coming decades we're going to see the same thing that has reshaped the world of bits and applied to all those atoms. And that's why I have a chapter on things like nanotechnology and such. We're already seeing it in biotechnology. Paul Booth wrote a piece on how we genetically engineered a smallpox virus and we used the signal, but the protein synthesized were off, even though you didn't know how. And that certainly affected the physical world, and that's just the beginning. So I think that the digital versus real division is a fairly transitory.
No, but there's actually, the interest. I know that it's a really interesting issue. Is like, how do you bring these technologies to market? Can you bring these technologies to market? And you're seeing in the 1990s. There were, with the IT revolution, there was all of these new technologies that were brought out in which the people decided we're going to grow this firm to scale. We're going to take this thing all the way through. We're going to bring it to market. And a lot of new firms were created. One of the things you're seeing now, 10 years later, is a lot of the decisions within the venture capital industry, sort of sector, is that, say, with alternative energy systems, alternative energy technologies, there's a lot of activity there, but the exit strategy for the venture capitalists is not to bring the firm all the way to the marketplace. It's to show that the technology is viable, that you can create a marketplace, and then you sell out to one of the top 4 firms that basically controls the entire sort of technological array for alternative energy. And that's the exit strategy. And that's very different than what 10 years ago.
Let's have 2 more questions, and one of them has to go to this distinguished gentleman in the front row. Ron, could you please?
Ron Davis, I sports line of the reason. My question to Joe Trippi, heartened as I am on your vision of either one or both of the major parties crashing and burning for years. I do think that they're desperately trying to stop that from occurring by campaign finance reform. They're basically saying, you're not going to raise this money, we're going to publicly finance it all. And this world of this notion of these paintings out there, people sending their money into the blogs and saying, well, we're not going to allow this country to exist. And we're going to keep the 2 parties in existence.
Well, certainly the 2 parties are trying to do everything they can to.
Well, if they said they make it illegal for the blogs to raise money, what do you do?
I don't think that's going to. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to do that in the end. But we'll see. This is a real big fight that's going to occur here between the grassroots, and the elites. And I think the elites will try to do everything they can to stay in power for the obvious reasons. I'm not sure that they can stop the true citizens movement to upset the apple cart. And I think it's going to happen. I think people underestimate how much the American people want to change these 2 parties, and are not going to just sort of go along with it. But we'll see.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned 75%, and after that it's Armageddon. They control it and shut all the doors. Why was Toyota, people like that, able to come in on General Motors and Chrysler when they controlled the whole U.S. market, produce junk and had sweetheart deals with FL-CIL? How'd that happen?
We invited them in. We invited Toyota. The United States of America invited Toyota to sell cars in this country. So the Japanese did not invite the General Motors to sell cars in that country. there was a difference in policy. One of the reasons that we in this country invited Toyota in was actually to help break up the oligopolies, back when General Motors had 50% of the marketplace and Ford 30 and Chrysler 20. Rather than just going through antitrust, we said, you know what, we can also do it by bringing in competition from abroad. So there's actually, one of the reasons we did it was to increase competition in this marketplace. It's actually worked for us, it's great. But the thing is that that's how we operate, that's not how other people
That was
operate.
done once and will never happen again, is what you're saying to me?
In the case of something like, say, in the case of the DRAMs, the fact is we invite people in to come compete with us, and what they've ended up doing is running off with that technology, running off with that marketplace, putting it someplace far away now, and we may not get access to it if something happens. Just for instance, in Korea, one of the things that will happen is we don't have access to DRAMs or LCD screens, which go into every system, every complex industrial system that this country. Trade. We can do whatever basically, it depends what kind of system you want. Basically, in terms of trade, we're sort of operating on one idea that it should be free and then we benefit from free trade, and that's great. But not everyone else is playing that way.
We can manufacture DRAM and problem solve over here.
We can also limit how much we're going to buy from Korea. We can actually we don't necessarily have to have it here. We could be buying it from India. We could buy it from Brazil. We could buy it from France.
There's only one place to make it.
That's right. That's right. And at the point when we get down to one place, that's why we need to use the power at the border. We need to use our power of government to make sure that we distribute. We force the firms that buy the stuff to distribute it.
I am going to insist on my power as moderator to bring this conversation to a close right now. I want to make sure that everyone knows that there are copies of Army of Davids for sale as you leave. We also have the bar for about another hour.
Go to the competition.
Open bar, buying the book, open bar, buying the book. Take a minute to decide, and we'll meet you over at the bar. Thank you all